Act 1. Linnea Vance, Queen of the Blackwood Kingdom, stood in the doorway of the glass house at the edge of the castle grounds, her sanctuary in a place that had become her prison. 6 months. 6 months of existing as a ghost in gilded halls, a specter in silk she had not chosen, bearing a title that meant less than the dirt beneath her fingernails. The marriage had been a transaction, her father's solution to a problem she had never asked to be. She was the broken daughter, the one whose wolf had never awakened, who had failed her first shift and brought shame to an Altha's bloodline. She was expendable, tradable, a signature on a treaty that secured borders her small pack could not defend alone. Altha King Theron Blackwood had needed an alliance. Her father had needed protection. She had been the currency that bought both. She pressed her palm against the cool glass pane, watching her breath fog the surface. Inside her chest, where other shifters felt the pulse and presence of their wolves, there was only silence. It had been silent since she was 13, since the night her mother died and her wolf had tried to rise for the first time. She remembered the feeling, a surge of primal energy, a presence trying to claw its way to the surface to protect her, to help her fight the unbearable grief. But the pain had been too much, too overwhelming, a tsunami of loss that threatened to drown her. So she had pushed. She had shoved that rising force back down into the dark, locked it away, and slammed every door in her soul shut. The healers had tried for years to coax her wolf out. Rituals under the full moon, herbal concoctions, meditation in sacred groves. Nothing worked. The silence only grew deeper, more absolute, until even she began to believe what everyone whispered. She was broken, defective, a wolfless omega in a world where your wolf was your worth. Her father had stopped looking at her with pride. Her pack had stopped looking at her at all. When the offer came from Blackwood, a political marriage to seal a treaty, her father had called it an honor. Linnea had seen it for what it was, a way to finally be rid of the daughter who had disappointed him. She had entered the marriage expecting coldness, a political alliance that would be polite but distant. She had not been prepared for the sheer, suffocating emptiness of Theron's dismissal. He did not speak to her. He did not look at her. In the 6 months since the formal, sterile ceremony, he had not spent a single night in the massive suite they were meant to share. The bed was a continent of cold linen, one side pristine, the other bearing the faint impression of her lonely form. The castle was beautiful and cold, filled with servants who followed their king's lead and looked through her as if she were made of glass. They brought her meals on silver trays and cleared them away mostly untouched, their faces impassive masks. She was fed, clothed, and housed in suffocating luxury, a bird in a gilded cage whose owner had forgotten its existence. For the first 2 months, she had tried. She had left notes requesting an audience, slipped beneath the door of his study in careful handwriting. She had appeared at the entrance to the council chamber, hoping to be invited in. She had asked the head housekeeper, Mrs. Davros, to inquire if the king might join her for a single meal. Every attempt had been gently but firmly rebuffed. The king is occupied. His Majesty has matters of state. Perhaps another time, Your Majesty. The title was a mockery. She was a queen who ruled nothing, not even her own schedule. By the 3rd month, she had stopped trying. She retreated into the glass house, the one place no one seemed to care about, and she let her hands remember what it felt like to create life instead of simply endure it. She coaxed dormant seeds into bloom, nurtured fragile seedlings, filled the space with moon-petal flowers and night-blooming jasmine. The scent of damp earth and growing things was the only thing that felt real. Her only companion was Mira, a young servant girl with kind eyes who brought her tea and spoke to her as if she were a person, not a ghost. Mira had warned her quietly one afternoon, her voice barely above a whisper. "The court talks, my lady. They say you should return to your father, that the marriage is an embarrassment, that you serve no purpose here." Linnea had simply nodded, her hands still buried in the soil. What could she say? They were right. In the 5th month, a letter had arrived from her father, the seal of the Faded Hills pack pressed into green wax. She had opened it with trembling fingers. Daughter, the pack asks after you. They inquire if you are well, if you are honored, if the alliance serves us as promised. I have told them you are content and valued. Do not make me a liar. Do your duty. Uphold our family name. The weight of it had crushed her. She could not go home. To return unwanted and unclaimed would shame her father and break the treaty. She was trapped, a living ghost in a castle that would never be her home. She had made one final attempt. She had requested, formally through Beta Kale, a private audience with her husband. Just 10 minutes. Just a chance to understand what she had done wrong, to see if there was any path forward. The answer had come back 2 days later. His Majesty regrets that his schedule does not permit a meeting at this time. She had not cried. She had run out of tears somewhere in the 3rd month. She had simply nodded and returned to her glass house. Today, a council meeting was running late. Linnea had been walking the upper gallery, her soft slippers making no sound on the polished stone, trying to walk off the restless energy that came from another day of nothingness. The voices from the council chamber below drifted up through the carved archway. She recognized Theron's deep, authoritative tone, the one that could command a room with a single word. She should have kept walking. Her heart, that foolish, stubborn thing, had long since learned not to hope. But some part of her, some masochistic corner of her soul, always paused when she heard his voice, listening for her name, for any sign that she existed in his world at all. She stopped in the deep shadows cast by the afternoon sun. Lord Valerius, an elder with a voice like grinding stones, was speaking. Your Majesty, the Faded Hills pack grows restless. They expected their Alpha's daughter to be seated at your side, to have some influence in matters that affect their lands. The treaty is fragile if they feel their offering has been discarded. Silence, heavy and oppressive. Linnea held her breath, her fingers curling into fists at her sides. She could picture him in that room, seated on the throne of carved obsidian, his powerful frame radiating command and something else. Something that looked like sorrow, if you were close enough to see it. She had been close enough once, during the wedding ceremony. She had looked into his eyes, stormy gray, beautiful and haunted, and seen the ghost of a love that still possessed him. She knew the stories. Everyone knew the stories. His first mate, Anya, his true mate, taken by rogues 3 years ago. His heart had been buried with her. Linnea was not a replacement. She was a political necessity he was forced to endure. Someone else spoke, Beta Kale perhaps, his words too low for her to catch. But Theron's reply was clear, each word a perfectly crafted shard of ice aimed directly at her soul. Lord Valerius, you worry for nothing. The treaty is secured by my signature, not by the Omega. A murmur rippled through the council. Lord Valerius tried again, his tone cautious. Still, Your Majesty, the appearance of unity, Theron cut him off, and his voice was laced with an icy weariness that cut deeper than rage ever could. The Omega Queen? She means nothing to me. She is a signature on a page, nothing more. Her presence or absence from my side is irrelevant. The alliance holds. That is all that matters. Nothing. She meant nothing. The words did not make her cry. Tears were a luxury she had exhausted weeks ago. Instead, a strange and terrible calm washed over her. It was the calm of a long winter finally reaching its absolute frozen nadir. The last flicker of foolish hope, the part that had thought maybe, somehow, time would soften him, died. And in its place something new and hard began to form. It was not anger, not yet. It was resolve. He had said it. He had declared it before his entire council. She meant nothing. A signature on a page. And a signature could be erased. She turned away from the archway, her movements no longer hesitant or ghostly. Each step was measured, deliberate, carrying her back toward the opulent suite that had been her prison. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, mournful shadows across the floor. She did not bother lighting the lamps. She knew her way in the dark. She walked directly to the large, ornate chest at the foot of the massive bed. It was made of dark, polished wood, bound with iron, and locked with a key she had been given on her wedding day. The key had sat on her dressing table for 6 months, a small, cold thing she had never touched. Inside the chest, she knew, lay the marriage contract. She retrieved the key, its weight insignificant in her palm, and fitted it into the lock. The click of the mechanism turning was unnervingly loud in the silent room. She lifted the heavy lid. On top of a pile of folded velvet and linens lay the scroll, tied with a black ribbon, the seal of the Alpha King pressed into hard red wax. Her hands were steady as she broke the seal and unrolled the parchment. The terms of the treaty, the exchange of land rights and protection guarantees, were laid out in meticulous script. But she was not looking for those. Her eyes scanned the dense text, searching for the clause her father had mentioned in passing, a standard inclusion he had called it, a formality that was never invoked. A protection for the bride, he had said, in case the marriage became untenable. She found it near the bottom, under a section titled Conditions of Annulment. Her breath hitched. There it was, clear and undeniable. Should the union remain unconsummated and unbonded after a period of 6 lunar cycles, and should either party find the arrangement untenable, this contract may be declared null and void. Such a declaration must be made in writing by the dissenting party and delivered to the Alpha King's throne, to be witnessed upon the dawn following the final day of the 6th cycle. Tomorrow was the dawn following the final day of the 6th cycle. Fate, it seemed, had a sense of timing. A signature on a page. He had given her the very tool she needed to erase herself from his life. She went to the delicate writing desk in the corner, a piece of furniture she had never used. She pulled out a fresh sheet of parchment, its creamy surface smooth beneath her fingertips. She dipped the quill in the pot of ink, the scratching sound as she began to write a small rebellion in the crushing silence. Her script was not the flourishing hand of a queen, but the neat, practical lettering of a woman who had spent more time with books on herbalism than with tutors of courtly etiquette. I, Linnea Vance, formerly of the Faded Hills Pack, do hereby invoke the annulment clause of the marriage contract dated 6 lunar cycles prior. As the union has remained unconsummated and unbonded, I declare it null and void. She paused, the quill hovering over the parchment. She could have written more. She could have filled the page with the pain and humiliation of the last 6 months, with the echoes of his dismissive words. But what was the point? He had said she meant nothing. A queen might have raged, a woman in love might have wept. But Linnea was simply a signature on a page, and she was erasing herself. She signed her name at the bottom, Linnea Vance, not Queen Linnea, not Linnea Blackwood, just her name, the name she was reclaiming. She folded the parchment neatly and set it aside. The next step was to disappear. She did not pack the silks or the jewels. They were the costume of a queen she had never been. Instead, she opened the back of her wardrobe and pulled out the simple, worn traveling clothes she had arrived in. A sturdy brown wool dress, a thick cloak, and worn leather boots. They felt more honest, more her than anything else in this room. She changed quickly, the rough wool a welcome friction against her skin. She looked at her reflection one last time in the large, silver-gilded mirror. The woman looking back was pale and thin, but her eyes, the color of a summer forest, held a spark of defiance that had not been there an hour ago. She was no longer a ghost. She was a woman with a destination, even if that destination was simply away. She placed the wedding ring, heavy and cold, on Theron's writing desk in his private study, which connected to the suite through a door he never used. Next to it, she placed the delicate crown she had been given at the ceremony, a crown she had never once worn in public. Let him find them there. Let the empty space beside them speak for itself. Her last act was to retrieve a small, leather-bound satchel. Inside, she placed a small pouch of coins, money from the dowry trust she had requested 2 days ago through Mira, claiming she wanted to purchase books. No one had questioned it. She added a water skin, a loaf of bread, and a wedge of cheese from the untouched dinner tray, and a small, dog-eared book of herbal remedies. It was all she needed. Before she left, she found Mira in the servants' quarters. The girl's eyes widened when she saw Linnea in traveling clothes. "My lady." "I need your help," Linnea said quietly. "One last time." Mira had given her the guard rotation schedule, the times when the night watch changed shifts. She had hugged Linnea tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Be safe," she whispered. "Be free." Slipping out of the royal suite was easy. No one guarded her. No one watched her. Why would they? She was the irrelevant Omega Queen. She moved through the service corridors at 3 in the morning. Her knowledge of the castle's hidden pathways gleaned from months of lonely, aimless wandering. She was a shadow among shadows, her cloak blending into the deep gloom. The air grew colder, damper, smelling of earth and stone as she descended into the lower levels of the keep. She found the small, rarely used postern gate, the one the gardeners used. The bar was heavy, but the resolve humming in her veins gave her strength. It groaned in protest as she lifted it. She did not rebar it behind her. Let them know she had left intentionally. Let there be no question that this was her choice. She slipped through the opening and into the pre-dawn chill. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and impending rain. She did not look back at the colossal silhouette of Blackwood Keep. She pulled her hood up, obscuring her face, and walked into the darkness of the Wolfwoods, her path lit only by the sliver of a waning moon. In her pocket, folded carefully, was a crude map sketched on parchment. Tobias, the old gardener who had been kind to her, had drawn it weeks ago when she had asked about the Western Territories, claiming she wanted to know the geography for a story she was writing. He had told her about Silver Creek, a pack in the neutral lands ruled by a wise alpha named Alara. "She takes in those who need a fresh start," he had said, his old eyes knowing. "Those fleeing bad situations." She had not known then that she would use it, but she was grateful for it now. She had a long way to go before the sun rose. A long way to go before the king found her declaration on his throne. Theron Blackwood, Alpha, King of the United Packs, woke to a profound and unsettling silence. It was not the usual quiet of the royal wing before the castle stirred to life. This was a deeper void, an absence that prickled at the edges of his senses. He lay still for a moment, his powerful body taut, listening. Nothing. And yet, something was wrong. He could feel it, a wrongness in the air, a disturbance in the fabric of his carefully controlled world. He reached for the small porcelain cup on his bedside table, the one that held his evening ritual. Wolfsbane tea. He had been drinking it every night for 3 years, since Anya's death. It numbed the wolf, quieted the beast that howled with grief, made it possible to function as a king when all he wanted to do was rage and destroy. His healer prepared it fresh each evening, a bitter brew that tasted like ash and felt like a blanket over his soul. But this morning, the cup sat full and cold. He had forgotten to drink it last night. He had been too consumed with council matters, too exhausted, and he had fallen into bed without the ritual that kept him numb. His wolf, the great black beast that had been a silent, suppressed passenger within him for so long, stirred. It was not the usual drowsy awareness. This was sharper, more insistent, pushing against the walls he had built. Gone. The thought was not his own. It came from the wolf, a creature of instinct he had long drowned in wolfsbane. He dismissed it with a surge of annoyance, reaching for the cold tea. He would drink it now, double the dose, silence the beast again. But his hand froze halfway to the cup. The scent. For 6 months, a faint, unobtrusive fragrance of lavender and rain had clung to the suite, to the air, to the very stones. He had actively ignored it, walled it off, refused to let it settle in his mind or his senses. It had been there every morning, a whisper he pretended not to hear. Now, its complete absence was a screaming void. His wolf surged forward with a force that nearly knocked him out of bed. "Mate," Gone. The word was not a thought. It was a howl in his soul, primal and desperate. He staggered to his feet, his heart pounding. No, this was the wolfsbane withdrawal, a trick of his unsuppressed wolf trying to... The door to his study was ajar. He never left it ajar. He moved toward it, his bare feet silent on the cold floor, and pushed it open. On his desk, carefully placed side by side, were two items: the heavy gold wedding ring, the delicate diamond-encrusted crown. His heart stopped. He moved like a man in a nightmare, his hands reaching out to touch them, to confirm they were real. The metal was cold, the crown was light. Both were empty of the warmth of the woman who should have worn them. His eyes flew around the room, searching for something, anything. And then he saw it. The door to the Queen's suite, the door he had never once walked through, was open. He crossed the threshold. The room was pristine, untouched. The bed was made, the wardrobe closed. But it was empty in a way that had nothing to do with physical objects. The life that had existed here, quiet and unobtrusive as it was gone. He tore through the room like a madman, opening drawers, searching for any sign of where she had gone. Nothing. The silks and jewels he had provided were still there. The traveling clothes were gone. She had taken nothing he had given her. She had left everything behind. His wolf was howling now, a constant, anguished sound inside his skull. Mate, find mate. Where is mate? Shut up, he snarled aloud, his hands shaking. She was never. But his wolf would not be silenced. Not this time. It threw image after image at him, memories he had suppressed, moments he had refused to acknowledge. The day she arrived, the way his wolf had surged the moment she stepped out of the carriage, the way every instinct had screamed, mate, with a force that had terrified him. He had stumbled to his chambers and drained 2 cups of wolfsbane, drowning the recognition before it could take root. The flicker of hope in her green eyes during the ceremony, hope he had extinguished by refusing to meet her gaze. The notes she had left, requesting an audience, notes he had ignored. The way she moved through the castle like a ghost, and how his wolf had whined every time, pushing at him to go to her, to speak to her, to claim her. He had numbed it all, drowned it all, refused it all, because he had been terrified. Terrified that if he let himself feel anything for her, the grief would come back and destroy him. Terrified that love was a blade that only brought pain. Terrified that his heart could not survive being broken a second time. So he had built walls. He had pushed her away. He had treated her like a piece of furniture, irrelevant and ignorant. And yesterday, he had told his council she meant nothing. He staggered backward, his legs giving out, and he sank to the floor in the middle of her empty room. The wolfsbane was wearing off completely now, and the full force of the mate bond, 6 months of suppressed, denied, drowned recognition, hit him all at once. It was not a gentle awareness. It was a cataclysm, a supernova of need and recognition and soul-deep agony. She was his mate, the Omega with the sad green eyes and the quiet strength, the woman who tended a garden in a forgotten glass house and never once asked him for anything, the one the moon goddess had given him as a second chance, a miracle he had been too blind and cowardly to see. And he had driven her away. A howl tore from his throat, raw and broken, the sound of a beast that has lost its other half. It was not the sound of a king, but of a wolf in agony. The sound echoed through the castle, shaking the very stones, a lament that spoke of desolation and soul-deep regret. He could not breathe. He could not think. The pain was worse than Anya's death, worse than anything he had ever known, because this loss was his fault. He had done this. He had taken the gift the goddess had given him and thrown it away. Footsteps pounded down the corridor. His beta, Kale, burst through the door, sword drawn, expecting an attack. He found his alpha king on his knees in the empty queen's suite, his face a mask of anguish, his eyes blazing with a feral, golden light that had not been seen in years. "Theron, what?" She's gone, Theron rasped, his voice shattered. She's gone, Cale. Cale looked around the room, taking in the empty wardrobe, the missing personal items, the air of finality. His face paled. The Queen has left? She's my mate, Theron bit out, the confession torn from his soul. She's my mate, and I drove her away. The words hung in the air between them, the weight of the catastrophic failure crushing. Cale, who had served Theron for 15 years, who had fought beside him and counseled him, looked at his king with something close to pity. My God, Theron, your wolf knew? From the beginning, Theron said, his voice breaking. From the moment she arrived. I felt the pull. I thought it was a betrayal to Anya. I thought if I ignored it, if I drowned it in wolfsbane, it would go away. I was afraid, Cale, afraid to feel anything again. So I pushed her away. I ignored her. I was cruel. And yesterday I told the council she meant nothing. He looked up at his beta, his eyes wild with desperation and self-loathing. I have to find her. I have to. We will find her, Cale said, his voice steady, trying to anchor his spiraling king. I will organize search parties, send riders. No, Theron interrupted, rising to his feet with sudden violent purpose. I will find her. My wolf will not rest until I have her back. Organize the patrols, send word to every border, but the main search is mine. He moved with frantic energy, searching the room for any clue, any sign of where she might have gone. His wolf was howling for him to shift, to run, to hunt, to find their mate. And then he saw it. On the floor near the open window, a single piece of parchment, half hidden beneath the curtain. He grabbed it, unfolded it. It was the annulment declaration, a copy she must have made for herself and dropped. But on the back, in her neat handwriting, were 2 words. I'm sorry. Sorry. She was apologizing to him. The realization was a knife to his chest. He crushed the parchment in his fist and ran. Act 2. The Hunt. Linnea's Journey. Linnea walked until her feet were numb and her lungs burned with the cold air. She did not dare stop, not until the sun was high in the sky and she had put as many miles as possible between herself and Blackwood Keep. The forest was dense, the underbrush thick, and the path, such as it was barely visible. But Tobias's map was clear, and she followed it with the focus of a woman who had no other choice. Every snap of a twig made her flinch. Every rustle of leaves sounded like pursuing guards. She knew Theron would send men after her. A runaway queen, no matter how insignificant she had been, was a political embarrassment. The treaty could be at risk. She had to assume he would hunt her, not because he wanted her, but because he needed to control the narrative. By midday, she reached a wide, fast-flowing river. She did not hesitate. She waded in, the water shockingly cold, stealing her breath and soaking her wool dress until it was heavy and cumbersome. But she remembered reading once that water would wash away her scent, make her harder to track. She pushed her way downstream for nearly a mile, clinging to the bank when the current tried to pull her under, before she dared to climb out on the opposite side. She was shivering violently, her teeth chattering, but she did not stop. She found a dense thicket of ferns and collapsed into it, squeezing the water from her hem and wrapping her cloak tightly around herself. She ate a small piece of the bread, the dry crumbs scraping her throat, and forced herself to drink from the water skin. Rest. Just a few minutes. But exhaustion pulled her under, and she slept fitfully, dreaming of gray eyes and a voice that said she meant nothing. When she woke, the sun was lower in the sky. She had slept for hours. Panic gripped her, and she forced herself to her feet and kept moving. For 6 days she traveled. She moved mostly at night, using the stars and Tobias's map to navigate. She hid during the day, sleeping in short, restless bursts in hollow logs or beneath dense undergrowth. She foraged for berries and edible roots, her knowledge of plants keeping her from starving. She found wild onion and wolfsbane, crushing the pungent plants and rubbing them on her boots and cloak to mask her scent. It was a meager defense against the heightened senses of a werewolf, but it was all she had. She avoided roads and villages, sticking to the wild places, becoming as much a creature of the forest as the deer and the foxes. The physical hardship was immense. Her feet blistered and bled, her muscles ached, hunger gnawed at her belly. But with each step, a part of her felt more alive than it had in months. The cold wind on her face, the ache in her body, the sharp edge of survival. It was all real. It was a world away from the silent, gilded cage she had left behind. She was no longer waiting for scraps of acknowledgement. She was acting. She was surviving. On the 7th day, she stumbled out of the dense forest and saw it in the distance. A large, thriving settlement nestled in a valley, a silver ribbon of river winding through it. Smoke curled from chimneys, and she could see the shapes of people moving about their work. It had to be Silver Creek. Hope, fragile and tentative, bloomed in her chest. She was filthy, exhausted, and half-starved, but she had made it. She tidied herself as best she could, using water from a stream to wash her face and hands, smoothing her tangled hair. She brushed the worst of the dirt from her cloak. She needed to look like a traveler seeking refuge, not a threat. She walked toward the settlement on the open path, not skulking through the trees. 2 pack warriors, a man and a woman, met her at the edge of the territory. They were not hostile, but their stances were wary, their hands resting near the knives at their belts. "State your purpose," the man said, his voice a low rumble. "I am a traveler," Linnea replied, keeping her voice steady, her gaze respectful but not submissive. "My name is Lynn. I have journeyed a long way. I ask for sanctuary and a chance to work for my keep." The female warrior's eyes scanned her, taking in her worn clothes, her thin frame, the deep exhaustion etched on her face. "Where do you come from, Lynn?" "From the east," Linnea answered vaguely. "My pack was scattered. I am alone now." It was close enough to the truth. The warriors exchanged a look. "Wait here," the man said, before loping off toward the largest building in the center of the village. Linnea waited, her heart pounding. This was it. They could turn her away, send her back into the wilderness where Theron's trackers were surely searching. Or they could let her in. The warrior returned a few minutes later. "Alpha Elara will see you." Alpha Elara was a tall, striking woman with silver-streaked hair braided down her back and intelligent, discerning eyes the color of amber. She sat not on a throne, but in a comfortable chair by a warm fire in a large, open hall. A gray wolf, large and calm, rested at her feet, its head lifting to watch Linnea as she entered. Elara gestured for Linnea to sit in the chair across from her. "You look like you have been through a great ordeal, Lynn," the Alpha said, her voice calm and kind, but with an edge of steel beneath it. This was a woman who had seen much and would not be easily fooled. "Tell me your story. The real one." Linnea hesitated. Trust was a currency she no longer possessed, but looking into the Alpha's steady gaze, she saw no judgment, only a quiet strength and wisdom. And she was so tired of carrying the weight alone. So she told her. Not everything. She did not use her real name or Theron's title. She spoke of an arranged marriage to a powerful, grieving man who wanted nothing to do with her. She spoke of 6 months of loneliness, of being invisible in her own home. She spoke of the dismissal, the final, crushing words that had driven her to invoke an annulment clause and run. She did not cry, but her voice was thick with the unshed tears of half a year. When she finished, the silence in the room was heavy. Alpha Elara watched her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. The gray wolf at her feet lifted its head and let out a soft whine, nuzzling its head against Elara's knee. "A broken heart is a heavy burden to carry alone," Elara said finally, her voice gentle. "And a bond rejected? That is a wound that festers." Linnea looked at her, startled. "Bond? You may not feel your wolf, child, but he has one. And no wolf is blind to its mate. even if the man is a fool. The words struck Linnea like a blow. Mate. Theron? The thought was both terrifying and absurd. If she was his mate, why would he treat her with such utter disdain? He lost a mate before, Linnea whispered, the pieces clicking into place. He still grieves her. Alara nodded slowly. Ah, then he is not just a fool. He is a coward. Fear can blind even an alpha, make him reject the very thing his soul needs. But the bond remains, whether acknowledged or not, and a bond denied will howl for what it is owed. She stood and walked to Linnea, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. You are safe here, child. You can work in our greenhouses. I am told you have a gift with plants. The earth is good for healing a wounded soul. Rest now. You have earned it. Linnea felt the knot in her chest loosen just a fraction. Thank you, Alpha. Call me Alara, the woman said with a small smile. We do not stand much on formality here. For the first time in 6 months, Linnea felt a flicker of peace. She was not a queen, not a political pawn. Here, she was just Lynn, a woman being offered a moment of grace. And for now, that was more than enough. 2 weeks passed. Linnea worked in the greenhouses, her hands in the soil, coaxing life from seeds. The work was hard but satisfying, and the people of Silver Creek were kind. They did not pry, did not ask questions she was not ready to answer. She began to eat again, to sleep without nightmares. The hollow ache in her chest was still there, but it was no longer all-consuming. And then the news came. A traveling merchant arrived, bringing gossip from the Eastern Territories. An alpha king was hunting for his runaway queen. A great black wolf, half mad with desperation, had been seen crossing pack territories without permission, searching. Alara came to Linnea that evening in the greenhouse. The whispers have reached us, she said quietly. An alpha king of Blackwood is searching for his queen. A woman with brown hair and green eyes, last seen fleeing his castle. The timeline matches. The description matches. Linnea's hands froze in the soil, her heart lurching. You know who I am. I pieced it together, Alara said, her voice without judgment. Your secret is safe with me, Linnea Vance. You have my protection. But I will not lie if he comes, and he will come. I know, Linnea whispered, fear coiling in her stomach. Theron's search. Theron's search had become an obsession that consumed him utterly. The trail had gone cold at the river, her scent washed away by the current. He had run up and down the banks in his wolf form for hours, desperate, searching for any sign of where she had exited the water. Nothing. Frustration and fresh waves of panic tore through him. His wolf paced, frantic, howling its anguish into the wind. Find her, find mate, make it right. He had shifted back to human form and coordinated with Kale, sending riders to every outpost, every border crossing. But he did not wait for their reports. He could not sit still. He was a man possessed, haunted by his own failures. He slept in the woods, barely ate, pushed himself and his wolf to the brink of collapse. The king was gone, replaced by the desperate mate. For days, he chased false leads. A woman seen buying bread in a village, not her. A glimpse of a brown cloak disappearing into the woods, a farmer's daughter. Every dead end left him more ragged, more desperate. He was unshaven, gaunt, his royal leathers replaced by mud-stained hunting clothes. He looked like a madman. He felt like one. On the 8th day, Kale found him at a small inn on the border of the neutral territories. Theron was staring at a map, his eyes bloodshot, his hands shaking from exhaustion. Theron, Kale said quietly, setting a plate of food in front of him. You need to eat. You need to rest. You are no good to her if you collapse. I can't, Theron rasped. Every moment I waste, she gets farther away. Every moment she thinks I do not care, that I am not coming for her. She knows you are searching, Kale said. The whole kingdom knows. You have crossed 3 territories without permission, disrupted trade routes, terrified half the packs between here and the western border. If she does not know you are coming, she is the only one. Theron looked at his beta, his oldest friend, and for the first time, he let the mask crack completely. I told her she meant nothing, Kale. I said it in front of the council. I let her live like a ghost for 6 months. Why would she believe I am coming for her now? Why would she believe anything I say? Kale was silent for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, "Because you are going to prove it. Not with words, with time, with action, with everything you are. You are going to find her, and you are going to grovel, Theron. You are going to beg, and you are going to give her the choice to walk away if that is what she needs." Theron nodded, the words settling into his bones. He would find her, and he would earn her back, even if it took the rest of his life. The next day, a tracker returned with credible news. A woman matching Linnea's description had been seen heading towards Silver Creek, the neutral pack in the Western Valley. Theron's heart leaped. Silver Creek, Alpha Alara's territory. If Linnea had sought refuge there, Alara would protect her. Alara was known for her independence and her compassion. She would not give Linnea up easily. But at least he knew where she was. Hope, fierce and painful, surged through him. He left immediately, riding hard for Silver Creek. The journey took 2 more days. Days spent in an agony of anticipation and self-recrimination. What would he say to her? How could he possibly explain the depth of his foolishness, the chasm of his cowardice? He had no answers. He only knew he had to try. The border. When Theron finally reached the border of Silver Creek, he did not storm in with demands or commands. He stopped at the territorial line, dismounted, and sent a formal request for an audience with Alpha Alara. He would do this correctly. He would not give her any reason to deny him. Alpha Alara met him at the border an hour later, flanked by 2 of her warriors. She stood tall and proud, her silver hair gleaming in the afternoon sun, her amber eyes hard and appraising. "King Theron," she said, her voice even, giving nothing away, "you are a long way from home." "I am searching for my queen," Theron said, his voice hoarse from days of shouting orders and howling his grief. He stood before her not as a king demanding tribute, but as a man making a plea. "I have reason to believe she may have sought sanctuary with you." Alara's expression did not change. "I grant sanctuary to many travelers. I do not ask for their titles or their pasts." "Her name is Linnea," Theron said, his heart hammering against his ribs. "She has green eyes and brown hair. She would be tired, afraid, and she would have every reason to want nothing to do with me." "And why?" Alara asked, her question a sharp, pointed dart. "Would your queen be afraid of you, your majesty?" The question was a condemnation, and he had no defense against it. He flinched, the truth of his failure laid bare. "Because I was a fool," he said, his voice low and raw. "Because I failed her in every way a mate can fail. I pushed her away. I ignored her. I told my council she meant nothing. And she heard me." Alara's eyes flickered with something. Surprise, perhaps, or respect for his honesty. "I see, and now you wish to see her?" "I asked to see her," Theron said, and the distinction was important. "To speak with her. I will not force her. I will not demand anything. I need her to know that I am here, that I am sorry, that she was never nothing to me, even when I was too much of a coward to admit it." Alara was silent for a long moment, her gaze unwavering, weighing him. Theron felt the urge rise, the alpha instinct to command, to assert dominance, to demand compliance. He was a king. She was the alpha of a smaller, neutral pack. By the old laws, she should defer to him. But he choked the instinct down, forced it back. Command was what had driven Linnea away. It would not bring her back. "The woman in my care is under the protection of the Silver Creek pack," Alara said finally, her voice firm. "She will not be harassed, intimidated, or coerced. You will not see her unless she wishes it, and I will not force her to make that decision before she is ready. Theron wanted to argue, to plead, but he saw the unyielding strength in Alara's eyes. She was testing him. Protecting Linnea, yes, but also measuring him, seeing if he truly meant what he said. I will not force her, he said, his voice strained but steady. But I will not leave until I have spoken to her. I will wait. Alara regarded him for another moment, then nodded slowly. The lands outside my border are not mine to command. Wait as long as you like, Your Majesty. She turned and walked back toward her village without another word, her warriors following. Theron watched her go, a profound sense of helplessness washing over him. He was the Alpha King, one of the most powerful shifters on the continent, and he had been reduced to waiting at the gates like a beggar. He deserved it. He set up a simple camp just outside the territory line. A small fire, a bedroll, his horse tethered nearby. He did not return to the inn in the nearest village. He stayed here, in sight of the settlement, a solitary figure keeping vigil. He hunted his own food, cooked over his small fire. He did not approach the border again. He simply waited. His wolf paced within him, restless and desperate. She is close. Mate is close. Why do we wait? Because we have to earn this, Theron answered the beast inside. We have to prove we are worthy. And so he waited. One day became two. Two became three. The king, humbled, keeping a lonely vigil for the queen he had thrown away. Linnea watches. The news of Theron's arrival spread through Silver Creek quickly. Alara had been discreet, but the presence of a massive dark-haired man camping just beyond their border, radiating an aura of barely contained power and profound sorrow, was impossible to ignore. Alara came to Linnea in the greenhouse on the evening of his arrival. He is here, the Alpha said gently, without preamble. Linnea's hands froze in the soil. Her heart gave a painful lurch, a frantic bird beating against the cage of her ribs. She had known he would come. She had hoped, in some secret corner of her heart, that he would. But now that he was here, terror seized her. Theron, she whispered. He is asking to see you, Alara continued, her voice soft. He has not tried to force his way in. He says he will wait for you to agree to speak with him. He has set up camp outside our borders. He is waiting. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Linnea. See him? What could she possibly say? What could he say to her that would undo 6 months of dismissal and the crushing weight of those words? She means nothing. No, Linnea said, shaking her head, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't. I won't see him. Alara nodded, her expression understanding. Then you will not see him. I will tell him you have refused. He cannot force this, Linnea. The choice is yours. Linnea watched the Alpha leave, her hands trembling. She had her answer. She had her safety. So why did her heart ache with a fresh, confusing wave of misery? Days passed. Theron did not leave. From the edge of the village, if she walked to the western border of the greenhouse grounds, she could see his camp in the distance. A dark figure against the backdrop of the forest, a plume of smoke from his small fire. He did not approach. He did not send messages. He simply waited. The pack members watched him with a mixture of awe and pity. The Alpha King of Blackwood, brought to his knees by a quiet Omega who had finally said no. The story was spreading, whispered in the evenings by the fire. Linnea tried to ignore him. She threw herself into her work, tending to delicate orchids and hardy winter roses, her mind focused on the life in her hands, the simple, honest work that had no politics or pain. But her gaze was constantly, traitorously drawn to the west, to the dark figure keeping his lonely vigil, to the man who had said she meant nothing and was now refusing to leave. Curiosity, that persistent, painful human trait, began to gnaw at her. Why was he waiting? If this was about the treaty, about politics, he would have sent an envoy. He would have used threats or force. This quiet, patient vigil was something else. It was personal. After a week of this silent standoff, she could not bear it any longer. She needed to see him. Not to speak, not yet. Just to look, to try to understand. Under the cover of a cloudy afternoon, she slipped away to the western edge of the packlands, hiding herself in a grove of birch trees that offered a clear view of his camp. He was there, sitting on a log near his fire, staring toward the village. And the sight of him stole her breath. This was not the cold, imperious king she remembered from the wedding. His dark hair was unkempt, longer, falling into his eyes. His jaw was shadowed with stubble. His fine clothes were gone, replaced by worn, travel-stained leathers that had seen hard use. He looked haggard, exhausted, like a man who had not slept or eaten properly in days. But it was the expression on his face that struck her to the core. It was a look of such raw, undisguised longing, of such profound and desperate hope, that it made her own chest ache in sympathy. He was staring toward the village as if he could will her to appear through sheer force of need. All the icy authority, the impenetrable walls, were gone, stripped away, leaving only a man laid bare by his own heart. As if sensing her presence, his head snapped up. His eyes, those stormy gray eyes that had always slid past her, refusing to see her, locked onto hers across the distance. The clearing was wide, perhaps 100 feet separating them, but she felt the impact of his gaze like a physical touch. A jolt of electricity, warm and startling, shot through her. His entire body went rigid. He did not move, did not speak, did not even seem to breathe. He just stared at her, and in his eyes, she saw a maelstrom of emotions so intense it was almost overwhelming. Relief, desperation, pain, regret, and something else. Something that looked like hope and fear tangled together. He took a single, hesitant step forward, his hands slightly outstretched, as if to prove to himself she was real and not a phantom his mind had conjured. And then he stopped, as if remembering himself, remembering that he had no right to approach. The vulnerability in that single aborted movement, the way he held himself back, struck her harder than any words could have. This was not about a treaty. This was not about a runaway queen or political embarrassment. This was about a man who had realized what he had lost, and was terrified he would never get it back. The fear she had been carrying began to recede, replaced by a fragile, tentative sense of power. She was no longer the ghost in his castle, invisible and voiceless. Here, on this neutral ground, she held all the cards. She could walk away, or she could stay and listen. She held his gaze for a long, stretching moment that felt like an eternity. Then, deliberately, she turned and walked back toward the village, her heart a whirlwind of confusion and a strange, burgeoning sense of vindication. She found Alpha Alara in the main hall and spoke one word. Yes. The meadow. The meeting was arranged for the following afternoon in the neutral meadow that lay between Silver Creek territory and the Wild Woods. Linnea's terms were simple and non-negotiable. Alpha Alara had to be present as a witness, and Theron was to come alone and unarmed. He agreed without a single moment of hesitation. As Linnea walked toward the meadow with Alara at her side, her palms were damp, her heart racing. She wore the same simple brown dress she had escaped in, a deliberate choice. She was not returning as a queen draped in silks. She was coming as herself. Theron was already there, waiting in the center of the clearing. He stood tall, his posture tense, his hands clenched at his sides, as if he were physically restraining himself. As she approached, she saw the change in him up close, the lines of exhaustion and strain around his eyes, the hollows in his cheeks, the way he held himself like a man balanced on the edge of hope and utter despair. When he saw her, his breath hitched audibly, a sound of profound relief and pain. His eyes drank her in as if she were water and he had been dying of thirst. He took an instinctive step toward her, his hands lifting slightly, and then he caught himself. He froze. Linnea flinched, a small, involuntary movement. It was barely noticeable, but to Theron, it was a dagger to the heart. She saw the way his face crumpled, just for a second, before he forced himself to stillness. He stopped, holding the distance between them as if it were a chasm he had no right to cross. The motion, so slight, seemed to wound him more than any blade. This was the moment. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words, with 6 months of pain and longing. It was Theron who broke it, his voice hoarse and stripped of all authority. Linnea. Her name on his lips was different now. Not a title, not a dismissal. A name spoken with reverence and desperation. She nodded, unable to trust her own voice. She simply looked at him, waiting. He took a deep, shuddering breath, his eyes never leaving hers. There are no words to excuse what I did. No justification for the way I treated you. I can only offer you the truth. An explanation, not an excuse. Will you hear me? She hesitated, then nodded again. Alara moved to stand a respectful distance away, within earshot but not intruding, a silent witness. Theron began to speak. His voice was raw, each word pulled from some deep, wounded place in his soul. I loved my first mate Anya with everything I had. When she was taken from me, killed by rogues 3 years ago, I thought I would die with her. My wolf, it went silent with grief. I buried my heart with her body, and I told myself I would never love again, that I could not survive that kind of loss a second time. He paused, his hands trembling. When you arrived, I felt it immediately. The pull. My wolf recognized you from the first moment. It stirred for the first time in years, and it terrified me. His gaze was raw, holding nothing back. I saw you not as a gift, but as a threat. Not to my kingdom, but to the walls I had built around my broken heart. I thought if I did not let you in, if I kept you at a distance, it would not hurt when I inevitably lost you. Because in my mind, loss was inevitable. Love was pain. And I would not, survive it again. Linnea's breath caught. She had suspected grief, but not this. Not a fear so deep it had turned him into stone. So I pushed you away, Theron continued, his voice breaking. I ignored you. I drank wolfsbane every night to numb my wolf, to silence the part of me that knew you were my mate. I drowned the bond before it could take root. I let you live like a ghost, because I was too much of a coward to face what you represented. A future. A chance to feel again. A chance to love again. He took a step closer, then dropped to his knees in the grass before her. The Alpha King of Blackwood, the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories, knelt in the dirt before the Omega he had scorned. Alpha Alara watched, silent and still, bearing witness to the breaking and remaking of a king. The day you left, Theron said, his head bowed, his voice thick with unshed tears. I found your letter, and I had forgotten to drink the wolfsbane the night before. When I read your words, the bond hit me all at once. 6 months of suppressed recognition, 6 months of drowning my wolf's voice. It all shattered. The pain of your absence was worse than anything I had ever known. Because this loss, Linnea, this one was my fault. He looked up at her, and she saw tears on his face, tracks of silver cutting through the grime. I am not asking you to be my queen. I am not asking you to honor a contract I so callously disregarded. I am begging you to let me be your mate. Let me start over. Let me court you as I should have from the beginning, with patience and respect and honesty. Give me the chance to show you the man I am, not the ghost I was. Give me the chance to earn your trust, your forgiveness, and, if I am blessed beyond measure, your love. The clearing was utterly silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Linnea stared down at the bowed head of the king, at the proud shoulders shaking with the force of his confession. His vulnerability was a more powerful force than his authority had ever been. It disarmed her completely, shattering the ice that had encased her own heart. She felt Alara's gentle, encouraging presence, a silent reminder that the choice was hers and hers alone. She looked from the kneeling king to the wise Alpha and then back again. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was trembling but firm, carrying across the quiet meadow. Get up, Theron. He looked up, his eyes filled with desperate, questioning hope. She took a breath, and laid down her terms. No titles, no talk of kingdoms or treaties, no contract binding us, just you and me. Two people, starting from the beginning. Can you do that? A single tear escaped his eye and traced a path through the dirt on his cheek. He nodded slowly, a movement of profound and solemn agreement. Just you and me, he echoed, his voice choked with emotion. I swear it. He rose slowly to his feet, but he did not reach for her. He stood, waiting, giving her the space and the power. Then I will let you try, Linnea said quietly. But understand this, Theron. I am not the girl who arrived at your castle 6 months ago. I have learned to live without you. I have learned that I do not need a king or a mate to have worth. If you want me in your life, you will have to prove, every single day, that I am valued. Not as a political tool, not as a replacement for what you lost, but as myself, as Linnea. I will, he said, his voice fierce with promise. Every day, for as long as you will let me. She nodded, and for the first time in 6 months, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. Act 3. Theron did not return to Blackwood Keep. He sent word to Chaol, entrusting the kingdom to his beta's capable hands, with a message that was both simple and earth-shattering. I will return when I am worthy. Hold the kingdom. I am reclaiming my soul. He took a small, rustic cottage on the outskirts of Silver Creek, a humble dwelling with a leaky roof and a crooked door that he repaired with his own hands. He was no longer a king. He was simply Theron, Linnea's neighbor, a man trying to earn a second chance. The courtship began slowly, tentatively, like two wounded animals learning to trust again. He did not shower her with jewels from a royal vault. Instead, he left wildflowers on her doorstep each morning. Simple blooms he picked from the forest, arranged with clumsy care. He learned she loved a particular type of wildberry that grew deep in the woods, protected by thorny bushes, and he would spend hours foraging, returning with scratched hands and a small basket of the precious fruit. Linnea, in turn, began to lower her walls in increments. She left him a pot of herbal tea one morning, the kind that soothed coughs, because she had heard him struggling with one after a cold night. She baked bread with the pack's cook and left a warm loaf at his door. Small gestures, cautious steps toward something neither of them dared name yet. They began to talk. At first their conversations were stilted, circling the vast, painful chasm between them. But gradually it became easier. He asked about her life in the Faded Hills, about her love for plants and herbs. He listened with focused intensity, as if her every word was a precious gem he was storing away. She learned about his childhood, about the crushing weight of the crown he had worn since he was barely a man, about the loneliness of leadership that had only intensified after Anya's death. She began to see the person beneath the title, the man who had been buried under duty and grief. One afternoon, he found her in the greenhouse, her brow furrowed in concentration as she tried to graft a delicate orchid stem. "May I help?" he asked from the doorway, his voice hesitant. She looked up, surprised. "Do you know the difference between lavender and sage?" He stepped closer, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I know the scent of lavender, rain and sunlight and you." She paused, her hands still in the soil, her heart skipping. "That is unexpectedly poetic for a king." "I am not here as a king," he said quietly, kneeling beside her in the dirt. "Then who are you?" she asked, finally meeting his eyes. "A man who wants to learn about flowers," he said, his gaze steady and sincere. "If you will teach me." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Start by getting your hands dirty." He reached into the soil beside her, their fingers brushing. The contact sent an electric jolt through both of them, a spark of recognition and longing. Both froze. Linnea pulled her hand back slightly. "Wolfsbane," she said, her voice a little breathless. "Don't touch that one." Theron looked at the plant, then at her, his eyes dark with meaning. "Too late," he said softly. "I already have." The walls between them began to crack. One evening, they sat by the river that bordered the meadow, the water flowing gently, the air soft with the scent of blooming night flowers. Theron was telling her a story about his childhood, about falling out of a tree he had been trying to climb to impress a girl. Linnea laughed, a real, genuine sound, and he stopped mid-sentence, staring at her. "What?" she asked, self-conscious. "I have never heard you laugh before," he said, wonder in his voice. "It is the most beautiful sound I have ever heard." She looked away, flustered. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then she asked the question that had been haunting her. "Why did you drink wolfsbane for so long?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the water. "Because grief is easier than hope," he finally said. "If I did not feel anything, I could not lose anything. Numbness was safer than risking my heart again." "And now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned to her, and the intensity in his eyes took her breath away. "Now I am terrified every moment of every day, because I have everything to lose." "You cannot lose what you do not have yet," she said, her heart pounding. "Don't I?" he asked, and slowly, telegraphing every movement, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand lingered on her cheek, warm and gentle. She did not pull away. Her breath hitched, and she leaned into his touch for just a second, before reality crashed back and she pulled away, standing abruptly. "I should go," she said, her voice shaking. "It is getting late." He did not follow. He simply nodded, respecting the boundary she had drawn. "Good night, Linnea." She walked away, her heart racing, her skin still tingling from his touch. She was falling, she knew it, and it terrified her. One afternoon, Theron convinced her to let him teach her some basic self-defense. "You traveled alone through dangerous woods," he said. "Let me teach you how to protect yourself. Not because you need a protector, but because you deserve to feel safe." They trained in a clearing, and the physical proximity was both exhilarating and torturous. He showed her how to break a hold, how to use an opponent's size against them. "Do not telegraph your strike," he instructed, circling her. "Stay fluid." She lunged, frustrated when he easily sidestepped. "Easy for you to say, you are twice my size." "Then use that," he said. "Get close. Inside my guard where size does not matter." She stepped in, and suddenly they were very close, her hand on his chest, both of them breathing hard. Not from exertion, from the proximity, from the heat. "Like this?" she asked, looking up at him. "Exactly like this," he said, his voice rough, his eyes locked on her mouth. The air between them was charged, electric. He was staring at her lips, and she could feel the tension, the want, radiating from him. If she lifted up on her toes just a little, if she closed the distance, "If you kiss me right now," she whispered, her voice shaking, "I will not be able to think clearly." He closed his eyes, visibly struggling, and then stepped back, putting distance between them. "Then I will not," he said, his voice strained. "Not until you ask me to." "What if I never ask?" she challenged, her heart pounding. "Then I will wait forever," he said simply. And she believed him. A rainstorm rolled through one evening, sudden and fierce. Linnea, soaked from running back from the greenhouse, found herself standing outside Theron's cottage door, her hand raised to knock, her heart in her throat. She knocked. He opened the door, his eyes widening in alarm when he saw her drenched and shivering. "Linnea, come in, you are soaked!" "I have been thinking," she interrupted, stepping inside, water dripping from her cloak onto his floor. "About?" He grabbed a blanket, moving to wrap it around her. "About how tired I am of being afraid," she said, her voice firm despite the trembling. He paused, the blanket in his hands, waiting. "Afraid of what?" "Of this, of you, of how much I want—" She stopped, the words catching in her throat. He waited, barely breathing, giving her space to finish. "Want what, Linnea?" he asked softly. She looked up at him, vulnerable and determined. To stop waiting. And then she reached up, pulled him down, and kissed him. For a second he froze in shock. Then he groaned, a sound of relief and need, and kissed her back. His hands came up to frame her face, gentle despite the desperation she could feel thrumming through him. He let her control the pace, let her deepen the kiss, let her pour 6 months of loneliness and longing into the connection. When they finally broke apart, both were shaking, both breathing hard. "I choose you, Theron," she whispered against his mouth. "I choose this. I choose us." "My mate," he breathed, reverent, awed. "My queen, my everything." They stood there, foreheads pressed together, the rain hammering on the roof, and for the first time, both of them felt whole. The next morning, Cale arrived at Silver Creek, travel-worn and urgent. He found Theron and Linnea walking together by the river, their hands linked. "Theron," Cale said without preamble, "we have a problem." Theron tensed. "What is it?" "Faded Hills Pack is mobilizing," Cale said grimly. "Alpha Vance is demanding Linnea's return, or the treaty is void. Our scouts report they are preparing to march on the eastern border. If this escalates, we could be looking at war." Linnea's face paled. Her father, this was her fault. Theron's jaw tightened, but he looked at Linnea, not at Cale. "What do you want to do?" She blinked, surprised. "What?" "This is your choice, Linnea," Theron said firmly. "Do you want to return to face your father? Do you want me to handle it? Do you want to stay here and let the politics fall where they may? I will support whatever you decide, even if it means war." She stared at him, this man who had once dismissed her as nothing, now offering to let kingdoms burn if she chose not to go back. The growth was staggering. "We go back together," she said firmly. "This is my mess. I will face my father, but not as a runaway daughter, as your mate, as your equal." Theron smiled, fierce and proud. "Then we go back together." They rode into Blackwood Keep side by side 2 days later, their hands clasped, Cale and a small honor guard riding behind them. The court, which had been buzzing with rumors and speculation for weeks, fell silent when they entered the great hall. Linnea was not dressed in the silks and jewels of a queen. She wore simple traveling clothes, her head held high. Theron was not wearing his crown. They walked together to the center of the throne room, and Theron addressed the assembled court and council. "I stand before you not as your king, but as a man who has failed," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "I failed my mate, and I failed you by allowing my grief and fear to make me cruel and blind." He turned to Linnea in front of the entire court. "Linnea Vance, I dismissed you. I ignored you. I allowed my court to treat you as invisible. I told my council you meant nothing when you were everything. I broke you, and then I had the audacity to chase you, to beg you back." He took off his crown and held it out to her. "This crown is yours as much as mine. You are not my queen because I declared it. You are my queen because you chose to give me a second chance I do not deserve. And I will spend every day of my life earning that choice." The court was utterly silent, shocked. Linnea took the crown, and for a moment the room held its breath. Then, instead of placing it on her own head, she placed it on his. "He is not perfect," she said, her voice steady, addressing the court. "But he is mine, and I am his, not by contract or treaty, but by choice. If you cannot accept that, then you do not accept me, and you do not deserve him." Theron looked at her with such raw love and gratitude that several of the courtiers looked away, the intimacy too much to witness. The court erupted in murmurs, but before anyone could speak, the doors to the hall burst open. Alpha Vance, Linnea's father, strode in, flanked by warriors from the Faded Hills Pack. He was a tall, grizzled man with cold eyes. "Daughter," he said, his voice hard, "you have shamed our pack. You broke a treaty. Explain yourself." Linnea stepped forward, her chin high. "I invoked a legal clause, father, a clause you insisted be included for my protection. I used it because I was treated as nothing in this castle, because my husband refused to acknowledge me for 6 months, because I was miserable." "You had a duty," Vance began. I had a life, Linnea interrupted, her voice ringing. I am not a bargaining chip. I am not currency. I am a person. And I am done being traded and dismissed and ignored. This marriage will be on my terms, or there will be no marriage, and no alliance. Alpha Vance stared at his daughter, shocked. This was not the quiet, broken girl he had sent away. You dare. Yes, Linnea said firmly. I dare. Because I have learned my worth, father, and it is not contingent on your approval or on a treaty. If you want this alliance, it will be because you respect me and the choice I have made. Theron stepped up beside her, his presence a silent support. Alpha Vance, I owe you an apology as well. You entrusted me with your daughter, and I dishonored that trust. I failed her. But I swear to you now, on my life and my crown, she will never doubt her worth again. She is my mate, my equal, and my queen. Not because of a treaty, but because she chose me, and I will spend my life being worthy of that choice. Alpha Vance looked between them, his expression hard. Then, slowly, he looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw the strength there, the fire. Is this truly what you want, Linnea? She met his gaze without flinching. It is. He was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded, gruff. Then I will honor your choice, daughter. But know this, King Theron. If you fail her again, treaty or no treaty, I will come for you myself. I would expect nothing less, Theron said evenly. A new treaty was drawn up that afternoon. This time Linnea was not a clause or a condition. She was a co-signer, her name and seal beside Theron's, a queen with actual power and voice. That evening, Theron found Linnea in their chambers, staring out the window at the darkening sky. There is something I need to show you, he said quietly. Will you come with me? She nodded, curious, and took his offered hand. He led her through the castle, out into the gardens, and toward the far edge of the grounds. As they walked, she realized where they were going. The old, forgotten glass house. But when they rounded the corner, she stopped, her breath catching. It was not forgotten anymore. The structure had been completely restored, the glass panes gleaming, the frame repaired and reinforced. And inside, visible through the clear walls, was a riot of color and life. Her garden. Every plant she had nurtured, every flower she had coaxed into bloom, had been carefully transplanted and tended. You did this? She whispered, tears streaming down her face. I hired every gardener in the kingdom, Theron said, his voice thick with emotion. It took months. Your moon-petal flowers, your herbs, everything you planted, I had them moved here and cared for. I could not bring you home, Linnea. I did not know if you would ever come back. But I needed to preserve the only place you had been happy. I needed to believe you would return. She turned to him, and he was kneeling again, this man who had learned that the greatest strength was in humility. You did this for me? She asked, her voice breaking. I did this because you deserved a place that was yours, he said, because you deserved to be seen and valued, because I was trying to become the man you deserved, even if I never got the chance to prove it to you. She pulled him to his feet and kissed him, pouring every ounce of love and forgiveness into it. I love you, she whispered against his lips. I love you, Theron. And I love you, Linnea, he said, his voice shaking. My mate, my heart, my home. A week later, they prepared for the true bonding ceremony, the one that would seal them as mates before the goddess and the pack. But the night before, Theron found Linnea in the forest, sitting alone in a clearing, her face tilted up to the moon. Linnea, he called softly. She turned to him, and he saw tears on her face. What is wrong? I feel her, Linnea whispered, her hand pressed to her chest. My wolf. For the first time in over a decade, I can feel her. She is waking up. Theron's heart leaped. Your wolf? She nodded, tears streaming. When my mother died, I pushed her down. I locked her away because the pain was too much, and she has been silent ever since. But now, with you, with the bond, she is stirring. and I am afraid. What if I cannot do it? What if— You can, Theron said fiercely, kneeling before her. You are the strongest person I know, Linnea, and you are not alone. My wolf will call to her. We will help her come home. He shifted, the transformation fluid and controlled. The massive black wolf stood before her, his amber eyes gentle and encouraging. He lowered his head, pressed his forehead to hers, and howled. It was a long, mournful, beautiful sound, a call that echoed through the forest and into the deepest parts of her soul. Inside Linnea, something shattered. Not her. The cage, the walls, the fear. And from the silence, a voice answered. Always here, the voice said, feminine and strong and achingly familiar. Waiting for you to be ready. I am ready, Linnea whispered, tears streaming. I am so sorry I locked you away. You were a child, you were hurt, but we are not children anymore, and our mate is calling. The shift began. It was not violent or agonizing. It was like coming home after a long, lonely journey. Her bones reshaped, her senses exploded into vivid color and sound and scent. Fur rippled across her skin, silver gray with hints of brown, like moonlight on earth. She stood on 4 legs for the first time in her life, and she was magnificent. Theron's wolf stared at the silver wolf before him, and his entire being sang with recognition and joy. Mate, complete, whole, beautiful. They ran. Through the forest, under the moon, 2 wolves finally equal, finally whole, finally free. When they returned to the clearing hours later, both in human form, breathless and laughing, Linnea threw her arms around Theron's neck. Thank you, she whispered, for waiting, for believing, for loving me enough to let me heal. Always, he said, holding her close, for all my days. The next night, under the full moon, the pack gathered in the sacred circle for the true bonding ceremony. There were no crowns, no political speeches. It was ancient, primal, sacred. Theron stood before his pack, his eyes only for Linnea. I, Theron Blackwood, alpha of this pack, choose you, Linnea Vance, as my mate. Not as my queen, but as my equal. Not by obligation, but by choice. Before my pack, before the goddess, before all the world, I choose you. Now and for all my days. He slid a simple silver ring onto her finger, one he had made himself, engraved with a tiny moon petal flower. Linnea met his gaze, her own eyes shining with tears and joy. I, Linnea Vance, choose you, Theron Blackwood, as my mate. I choose you freely, with all my heart, with all my soul. I choose the man who learned to see me, who learned to kneel, who learned to love again. When he kissed her, it was not cold or perfunctory. It was a kiss that sealed a promise, a kiss of equals, a kiss that spoke of a long, hard winter finally giving way to a glorious spring. The pack howled their approval, the sound echoing across the kingdom. And in the distance, in the glass house filled with blooming life, the moon petal flowers opened their petals to the night, a symbol of love that had been tended, nurtured, and finally allowed to bloom. Epilogue. The kingdom flourished under their joint rule. Theron's strength was tempered by Linnea's quiet wisdom and compassion. The great castle, once cold and silent, was now filled with warmth and laughter. Her glass house expanded, its vibrant blossoms spilling out into the castle gardens, and she taught others her craft, healing through growth. Mira was promoted to head of the Queen's household, a position of honor and trust. Mrs. Davros apologized publicly and served Linnea with genuine respect. Lady Cressida left the court, unable to accept the change. And on nights when the moon was full and bright, the guards on the battlements would smile. For they would often see 2 wolves running through the forests, a great black wolf and a silver gray one, running side by side, equals in every way. The Alpha King who had learned to grovel, and the Omega Queen who had learned her worth. Together, whole, and finally, home.